Imagine living your entire life, guided by a belief that was never true. Not because someone deceived you, not because you lacked intelligence, but because your own mind quietly protected it. It sounds impossible. Yet it happens more often than most people realize. There are moments when we defend decisions we already know were mistakes, relationships that quietly drained us, dreams that no longer belong to the person we've become. Sometimes we keep believing, not because the story is true, but because the truth asks us to let go of a version of ourselves we've spent years protecting. The unsettling part is that we rarely notice it's happening, because the human mind has an extraordinary ability. It doesn't simply remember the past, it reshapes it, not to fool other people, but to preserve the person we believe ourselves to be. The greatest distortions of reality are rarely created by the world around us. More often, they are created by the stories we repeat until they become indistinguishable from the truth. What if the greatest obstacle to seeing reality clearly has never been ignorance, but the quiet voice inside your own mind insisting that you've already found it? If understanding people fascinates you, if you're searching for ideas that continue working long after the video ends, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing and join us as we explore the hidden psychology behind the human mind. Now, let's begin. Every person believes they see the world as it truly is. That assumption feels so natural. We almost never question it. Yet psychology reveals something surprising. We don't experience reality directly. We experience our interpretation of it. The difference seems small. In practice, it changes everything. Imagine wearing a pair of glasses with a tiny scratch across one lens. At first you notice it, but as days pass, your brain quietly adapts. The scratch never disappears. You simply stop seeing it. Beliefs work much the same way. The ideas we return to again and again begin to feel less like opinions and more like facts. Not because they have been tested, not because they have been proven, but because familiarity has a remarkable way of disguising itself as truth. The mind is drawn toward what feels familiar, even when familiarity comes at the expense of accuracy. And that is where self-deception quietly begins. Not with a dramatic lie, not with an intentional act of dishonesty, but with a small story we tell ourselves. I had no choice. It wasn't my fault. I'll change tomorrow. They never understood me. At first, these stories often serve a purpose. They soften disappointment. They protect us while emotions are still raw. There is nothing unusual about that. Everyone reaches for psychological shelter when life becomes painful. The danger begins when a temporary refuge becomes a permanent identity. Because every belief influences how we interpret the experiences that follow. Slowly, almost invisibly, we stop asking whether the story is true. Instead, we ask whether it feels true. Those are not the same question, and recognizing the difference may be one of the most valuable forms of self-awareness a person can develop. If self-deception is so common, why doesn't the mind simply tell us the truth? Because the mind is trying to accomplish two different things at once. One is to understand reality as accurately as possible. The other is to protect us from emotional pain. Most of the time, those two goals work together. But there are moments when they collide. Imagine spending years believing you made the right decision, building your identity around it, finding peace in it. Then one day, evidence appears that leaves little room for doubt. You were wrong. In that moment, your mind faces a choice: accept a painful truth, or preserve the story that has kept your identity intact. Most people like to believe they would choose the truth without hesitation. Psychology suggests otherwise. More often, the mind chooses what protects the self before it chooses what reflects reality. Not because we are irrational, not because we are weak, but because identity is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. We can tolerate uncertainty, we can survive failure, but a threat to our sense of who we are often feels like a threat to our survival itself. Think of a completed puzzle. If one piece doesn't fit, you simply replace it. But when that puzzle represents your identity, removing a single piece can make it feel as though the entire picture is beginning to fall apart. That is why changing your mind can feel unexpectedly painful. You are rarely changing a single opinion. You are rewriting part of the story you've spent years telling yourself about who you are. And stories are powerful. Every person carries them. I've always been independent. I'm the responsible one. I never give up. I'm a good judge of character. These stories are not the problem. They help us create continuity in our lives. They give our experiences meaning. The danger begins when protecting the story becomes more important than questioning whether it is still true. That is the moment the mind quietly begins filtering reality. Not to discover the truth, but to defend the identity it has already built. Imagine buying an expensive watch. A week later, you discover another model that is better in almost every way, and costs half as much. Some people would simply admit they made an expensive mistake. Others immediately begin defending the purchase. It looks better. The cheaper one probably won't last. I wasn't buying it for the price anyway. Notice what the mind is doing. It isn't investigating reality. It's protecting itself from regret. We've all done this, not only with money, but with friendships, careers, relationships, beliefs. The more emotionally invested we become, the harder it is to let go, not because the evidence is missing, but because accepting the evidence often requires admitting that the person we believed ourselves to be wasn't entirely accurate. And for many people, that feels far more painful than remaining mistaken. This is one of the quietest traps of the human mind. The longer a belief stays with us, the more familiar it becomes. And familiarity has a way of disguising certainty as truth. That is why experience alone does not always produce wisdom. A person can repeat the same mistake for 20 years and call it experience. Wisdom begins the moment experience is examined, the moment we stop asking, "How long have I believed this?" and begin asking, "Why do I believe it at all?" That single question changes the direction of thought, because it shifts the mind from defending to discovering. And the moment discovering the truth becomes more important than protecting your pride, self-deception begins to lose its grip. But there is another layer to self-deception, one that is even more subtle. Sometimes, the most powerful beliefs we carry were never truly our own. Long before we understand who we are, the world begins offering us an identity. Parents, teachers, friends, culture, every compliment, every criticism, every expectation leaves behind a small piece of a story. Over time, those pieces become the lens through which we see ourselves. Some of those stories help us grow. Others quietly become invisible prisons. Perhaps someone once told you, "You're not creative." It may have been spoken casually. Perhaps they forgot saying it years ago. But your mind remembered. Without realizing it, you stopped pursuing opportunities that demanded imagination. Not because creativity was absent, but because someone else's opinion slowly became your own belief. Or maybe you were always praised for being strong, reliable, the person who never struggled. At first, it felt like encouragement. Over time, it became an expectation you felt responsible for protecting. So you stopped asking for help, not because you didn't need it, but because needing help no longer fit the person you believed you had to be. Notice the shift. The belief was no longer serving you. You had begun serving the belief. This is how self-deception often takes root. Not through lies we invent, but through stories we inherit. and never think to question. The remarkable part is that the mind rarely asks, "Who gave me this belief?" Instead, it quietly asks, "How can I prove this belief is true?" That single habit changes the way we experience reality. Imagine someone who believes they are unlikable. They enter a room where 10 people smile warmly. One person barely acknowledges them. Hours later, which moment stays in their memory? For most people, it is the single interaction that confirms what they already believed. Not because the smiles were meaningless, but because the mind naturally gives greater attention to evidence that supports its existing story. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. It is one of the mind's most efficient shortcuts, useful in many situations, but dangerous when the story itself is false. Think of it like carrying a flashlight through a dark forest. Wherever you point the light, details become vivid. Everything outside the beam still exists. You simply stop noticing it. Beliefs guide attention in much the same way. They decide what stands out and what quietly disappears into the background. This doesn't mean every belief is wrong. It means every belief influences what your mind considers important and what it quietly overlooks. That is why two people can live through the same experience, yet leave with entirely different conclusions. One sees rejection, another sees redirection. One hears criticism and feels attacked. Another hears the same words and discovers an opportunity to improve. The event is identical. The meaning is different, because events rarely shape our lives on their own. The stories we attach to them do. Perhaps the most important question is no longer, "What happened?" It becomes, "What story am I using to explain what happened?" Because that story, more than the event itself, will influence every decision that follows. The people who grow the most are not those who avoid mistakes. They are the ones who refuse to build permanent identities around temporary failures. Instead of saying, "This failure proves I'm not good enough," they ask, "What is this experience trying to teach me?" That single question transforms failure. It stops being a verdict and becomes an education. That is where genuine growth begins, not when life becomes easier, but when we become willing to question the stories that have quietly been shaping our lives all along. Because the greatest obstacle to truth is rarely ignorance. More often, it is the certainty that our story could not possibly be incomplete. The certainty that we've already seen the whole picture, when we've only been looking through one small window. There is one final question. How do you know when you're deceiving yourself? The answer is simpler than most people expect. Pay attention to the beliefs that make you immediately defensive. Imagine someone gently questions one of your opinions. Before they've even finished speaking, you feel the urge to interrupt, to explain, to justify yourself, to prove them wrong. That reaction doesn't always mean you're mistaken, but it is always worth examining, because the strongest emotional reactions often surround the beliefs that have become part of our identity. When those beliefs are challenged, it no longer feels like someone is questioning an idea. It feels as though they are questioning who we are. That is why self-awareness is so important. Self-awareness is the ability to step outside your own thinking and observe it without immediately defending it, almost as though you were watching your own mind from a distance. Instead of asking, "How do I prove I'm right?" you begin asking, "What if I'm missing something?" It is a simple question, yet history has been shaped by people willing to ask it. Scientists who abandoned cherished theories when evidence demanded it. Philosophers who questioned assumptions their societies accepted without hesitation. Explorers who refused to believe the map was complete, simply because everyone else did. They did not become remarkable because they always had the right answers. They became remarkable because they never stopped asking better questions. Curiosity is one of the greatest enemies of self-deception. A curious mind is difficult to imprison, not because it knows more, but because it is always willing to discover that there is more to know. It understands a truth that many people spend their lives resisting. Changing your mind is not a sign of weakness. It is often evidence that your understanding has grown. Think about how children learn to walk. They fall, again and again. Yet they never interpret falling as proof that walking is impossible. Every failure is simply information. Another step in learning something new. Somewhere along the way, many adults lose that instinct. Instead of treating mistakes as teachers, they begin treating them as threats. They avoid admitting they were wrong. They avoid difficult conversations. They avoid uncomfortable truths. Not because those truths would destroy them, but because discomfort feels unbearable in the moment. Yet the discomfort we avoid today often becomes the limitation we carry for years. Growth has always demanded a temporary willingness to feel uncertain. One honest conversation, one difficult realization, one quiet admission. I was wrong. Can redirect the course of an entire life. There is another habit shared by people who rarely become trapped inside self-deception. They intentionally seek thoughtful disagreement, not people who argue to win, but people who care enough about the truth to challenge their thinking, because they understand something many people never do. The people who always agree with you may protect your comfort, but they cannot always protect your future. Sometimes, the most valuable perspective is the one that unsettles you, the one that forces you to see what your own mind has been carefully hiding. That doesn't mean accepting every opinion you hear. It means refusing to become imprisoned by your own. Real confidence is not believing you are always right. Real confidence is trusting yourself enough to discover when you are wrong. Perhaps that is the clearest way to recognize self-deception. Ask yourself one quiet question. If undeniable evidence proved I was wrong, would I genuinely want to know? Take a moment before answering, because the answer reveals more than the belief itself. It reveals your relationship with the truth. If the answer is no, the problem is no longer what you believe. The problem is how tightly you've attached your identity to believing it. Truth has something lies never will. It doesn't need your agreement. It doesn't become stronger when you accept it, or weaker when you reject it. It simply remains what it is, waiting patiently for the moment you're willing to see it. Most people spend their lives searching for honesty in others. They question motives. They examine words. They look for hidden intentions. Far fewer turn that same honesty inward. Yet that is where genuine freedom begins. Not when you stop making mistakes. Not when you become impossible to deceive. But when you become willing to question the stories your mind has repeated for so long, that they began to sound like facts. The strongest minds are not the ones that never change. They are the ones that never stop refining their understanding. Because every time you choose truth over comfort, clarity over pride, and curiosity over certainty, you weaken the grip of self-deception. You become less controlled by old stories and more guided by reality. The greatest lie is rarely spoken out loud. It is the one repeated so often that it no longer sounds like a lie. It simply sounds like who you are. And perhaps the most courageous act any human being can perform is to pause before defending a belief and ask one simple question. Is this the truth, or just a story I've been telling myself? That single question, asked with complete honesty, has the power to reshape an identity, to repair a relationship, to redirect a future. Because the quality of your life is shaped not only by the choices you make, but by the stories from which those choices are made. Change the story, and over time, you change the person living it. Think deeper. Go beyond average.